Hello, Austin here from Plebdevs, and we're back for, I think, part 4. Yeah, part 4 in our beginner tutorial series, focusing on just the very basics of writing your first code. We started with HTML, CSS, and now we're in JavaScript. This one is called Async JavaScript. We're going to continue building on the Bitcoin price tracker. So, prerequisites, in case you don't know, this is actually a video that's part of a series. You can find the tutorial right here. And you can find the link to these slides in the description of this video. And these slides will have, other links and some of the code that we're going to put in later as well. But yeah, got this tutorial playlist right here. It's called Beginner Tutorials for now. I might change the name later. It's more of like Beginner Front End or something like that. But we started with HTML, CSS. We got into basic JavaScript. We did JavaScript DOM last time. And this time we're getting into what I'm calling async JavaScript. So sweet, let's just get right into it. I try to keep these tutorials much shorter versus our courses and some of the other workshops we do. So let's get into it and start writing some code. Okay, so lesson objectives today, we're gonna review and expand upon DOM manipulation. We're actually not really gonna expand upon it. We're just going to look over what we've done in the last lesson and just remember kind of how we were able to use JavaScript through the DOM to manipulate the HTML elements that we already had in place. We're gonna introduce something called local storage to save user preferences. So this is a very useful, common tool that you'll use when building websites, when building web apps and stuff like that. And then we're going to introduce promises and async await for handling asynchronous operations. Now this sounds very confusing, very heady, but really what this is going to be is we're going to learn how to write JavaScript that has a undetermined runtime, meaning we need to be able to wait for stuff that might take a second inside of our code and understand how we can handle that so that we don't create garbage fires in the browser with our terrible code that's running a bunch of things at the same time. Okay, so review of the previous lesson. So in the previous lesson, we learned about basic DOM manipulation. So just remember the DOM stands for the document object model, and it's kind of represented in this graph here. And so the DOM is just this hierarchy. It's this tree that is all contained in a single object that we can access in order to change any of the pieces of UI that are rendering on the page, right? And so here we have some code examples. I think this is from the last lesson. No, these are just examples, but here we can see that we are able to get an element. So right here, element equals document.get element by ID. We can get element by class name. We can get element by if it's a footer or something like that. And then look at this, we're able to take that element that we define, change the color, style.color is red, style.font size 20 pixels. Oops. And then we can create an element right here. So const new element equals document.create element. And it's a span. So creating a span, new element.text content equals this text, hello, new element. So we can put in text inside of our new element and then say append child, which will basically append it to that tree, to the DOM. So this is just examples of what it might look like to using JavaScript, creating or grabbing and manipulating elements and then placing them back or replacing them or something like that. So in the previous lesson, you can find the link to that right here, or actually the link to our previously completed project. Let's click on this. So this is on Replit. And this was JS tutorial DOM. Let me zoom in a little bit. Okay, cool. So nothing too crazy going on here. We basically say current Bitcoin price. We show you the date and the time, and we refresh this every 1 second. We get the current Bitcoin price in dollars. We can refresh the price manually and we can hide and show it. And that was just kind of our basic examples just to get down for some simple DOM manipulation. And we have a few functions in here. If we just look over this code again, right? So We're in the head of our HTML document. We have a script here where we define fetch Bitcoin price. This is what makes our API call, our request to the Coinbase server to grab the price. So we do a GET request to the API URL. We want to get it back as JSON. If we get a status of 200 after it's done executing, we can get the Bitcoin price right here. And you see we get element by ID price dot text content equals $ plus Bitcoin price. So that's really the DOM manipulation we're doing once we get the price. And then we have a function to update the date and time, toggle the price visibility. And then we have these intervals where every 3 seconds we fetch the Bitcoin price. Every 1 second, this is 1,000 and 3,000 because they're counted in milliseconds. Every 1 second we update the date and time. And then this is the simple elements that we're returning right here. And you can see we're on click, we're calling these functions. So yeah, this is the code that we currently have. And we're gonna make this fetch Bitcoin price a lot simpler in this lesson. It's gonna look a lot cleaner, and we're gonna learn the most popular kind of common way to make API calls with JavaScript that I think is a little bit cleaner than what we have right here. So let's get into it. Okay, so I guess the first thing we're gonna do is actually start from scratch again by creating a new replit. So this is something I do every time. So we will go to replit, create a new HTML, CSS, and JavaScript replit. And then, yeah, we're gonna put in all the code from the last project and kind of start from that point. So that sounds good. So I'll go over here and we'll make a new replit. And I'll just name it whatever. Leave it as the default name. Great. And then let's start to grab this code in here. This is all the code that we just looked over a second ago. So we'll just paste this in. We'll go to the next slide. And go right below and paste this in. If I hit save, it'll format it all, make it look a little nicer. And cool, we see it is working like before. All right, so that was all the code from the last lesson. So let's get into the first new concept here, which is local storage. So I know this is a pretty busy slide, but I'm just trying to give you as much context as possible on this. So local storage is a web storage mechanism that allows websites to store key value pairs in a user's browser. So key value pairs, that's just like objects in JavaScript. So there will be a key, the key will be like name, and then the value will be Austin, right? And then when you want to grab my name, Austin, you'll look for the key name. This is basically just how key value pairs work. Very simple. But local storage lets you store these key value pairs in the user's browser. Why would you want to do this? Well, there's a lot of different reasons, but one of the main big ones is persisting some kind of data across multiple sessions, right? Because if I go to, let's just close these out. If I go to my app here, if I refresh this, the price does not stay up, right? Everything, all of this, what we call state, the state of the app, or the state of the web page rather, it gets reset from 0. So it starts from complete blank after we refresh. And this is because we're not persisting any information. We're not persisting any data across these sessions. And so this is kind of where, as developers, we use these terms a lot, and these terms are important to understand, like the idea of having state or having persistent storage, right? Where state is the concept of, you know, maybe there's some state of logic that is happening in your web page. Maybe I have a certain article open on your blog or something like that, or a certain tweet expanded in my browser. Okay, so that might be some state, but if I then refresh, that state is all wiped back to 0. Versus persistent memory will be something that is saved across sessions, I guess you would say. So that's a very important concept. And local storage is basically a way to take some bit of data in our app and persist it across sessions. Okay, so local storage lets you persist key value pairs across sessions in the browser. So it provides a way to persist data on the client side, meaning that the data remains available even after the browser is closed or the page is refreshed. Local storage has a larger capacity compared to cookies, which is typically around 5 megabytes per origin. So all similar things here: local storage, session storage, and cookies. These are all similar but slightly different mechanisms for persisting data in the browser. Alternatives to local storage: session storage is similar to local storage, but data persists only for the duration of the browser session. Cookies are smaller capacity, only around 4 kilobytes, and they can be sent to the server with each request. And cookies are like, that's how people track you a lot of times. They leave a cookie in your persistent storage, and they're able to tell that, oh, I interacted with this person, this one time, and I gave them this unique cookie. IndexedDB is a more advanced client-side storage solution for structured data and larger amounts of data. This is, a lot of people that build PWAs, stuff like that, they might use IndexedDB, such as Mutiny Wallet. And then server-side storage, storing data on the server using database. That's like the most traditional method, right? And that's what you might learn in our backend course or some of our more advanced workshops. Right here, remember that local storage is specific to a particular origin, particular domain, and is not shared across different domains for security reasons, right? So that's one good thing to know. When you save something to local storage in a user's browser on your, myspecialapp.com, it won't show up in austinspecialapp.com. It will only stay on that single origin. Okay, so that's a high level of local storage, but very simply, these 3 lines of code show you exactly how you'll be using it. So it's amazingly simple to use. It's more of just the idea of why we use it. We want to understand. So local storage is commonly used for storing user preferences. Maybe you have a dark mode preference. That's something that might be stored in local storage. Caching data to improve in performance and reduce server requests. It's a little bit of an advanced strategy. Persisting application state between sessions. Okay, we talked about this terminology, so we kind of know what this means now. So persisting some kind of state of logic in our application across browser closes or across browser refreshes, right? And then offline data storage for web applications. That's a good one. And so here's an example: setting, getting, and removing a local storage item. So here we store a value, a new value, local storage.set item. Here's our key, and we put our value as the second argument here. And then retrieving a value, we can grab anything from local storage. We can look for stuff in local storage by saying get item, get me this key. And then, of course, we can remove a value, removing it by the key. So just amazingly simple to use local storage. So let's get started. Let's update our app for the first time. So we're going to implement local storage in the Bitcoin tracker for kind of a cool use case here. We're going to give the user an option of different currencies. So we are going to add a currency selector dropdown. We're going to remember the user's preferred currency that they've selected before. And then we're going to store the user's preference in local storage and show that kind of by default. So this is the first bit of code that will change right here. So this is actually the definition of fetch Bitcoin price. So I can take this and let's stretch this out a little bit. Let's just update it right here from the top of the script tag and down to the API URL. We'll paste that. Okay, great. And I can save it and it'll format it. Great, so now we have a new function definition. I mean, it's essentially doing the same thing, but we start with a different new variable at the beginning. Let currency equal local storage.get item preferred currency, right? So on when we fetch the Bitcoin price, we're immediately going to look in local storage for preferred currency. And there's an OR operator here, right? So the double pipe, this means OR. So we'll say get the item preferred currency or just make it USD. So this is what currency will be. It'll either be the user's preference, or if that returns a null or just it doesn't exist, we will set this as USD. And then we put it right in here as a variable inside of the API URL. Because Coinbase gives us different options. We have BTC-currency/spot. And this is actually the API that we're going to. Great. Okay, so we got that bit of code in. So now we are going to replace the entire body here. So what we're doing now is we're adding a new script here in the body. Let me blow this up so it's a little bigger. Okay, so new script inside of the body. So, you know, everything from here up, this is what we already have. Except first of all, we're adding a select dropdown for choosing currency. So this is this select right here. We give it an ID. And right now, just starting with USD and Euro, but I mean, you can add more currencies as needed. And then we're gonna have a script that will run after this body is rendered, because it's at the bottom. It will run and we will get the stored currency from local storage. So we're going to grab it right here. And then if there's a stored currency, we're going to update the currency selector to select that value by default. So it's selected by default in the dropdown. And then we're adding an event listener to listen for a change. And on a change, we're basically going to take selected currency. We're going to say it is this dot value, and then we're going to set it to local storage. And then we're going to fetch the Bitcoin price again immediately, right? So this logic will basically, it's just making sure that whatever is selected in the dropdown is what's showing on load. And then if the user changes that preferred currency, we make sure that we update it in local storage. So let's get this code down. I hope this isn't too confusing, just reading through it. But let's go and paste this over the body right here. And we can actually try this out now. We should, if I run this again. Okay, we now have a new drop down and it defaults to USD. Let's see, price isn't coming in. We must have messed something up. Let's see what our console says. XHR is not defined. Oh, I pasted over our line of code that defines XHR. So let's just go get that back. Should be right here from the last lesson. Yeah, right here we say XHR equals new request. Whoopsie, okay. We'll put that right before currency. That seems, actually we'll put it right after. And there we go. Now the price shows up in USD. And if I switch to Euro, 62,000 for Euro. And now look, if I refresh this page, it should say Euro still. Yes, so it defaults to Euro if I refresh. And if I go back to USD, refresh again, and it's back to USD. Pretty cool. And so let's actually, let's open this up in a new window, and I'm going to show you exactly where this is in local storage. So I can inspect. Let's zoom in. And so in our browser console, we can go to storage. Pull this out. We'll see there's local storage. We'll see this is for this specific domain. Oh, it's not showing anything for this page. Okay, there we go, because we hadn't selected anything yet for this new tab we opened up. So now we just selected euro, and we see that preferred currency is now stored in local storage as euro. And if I switch back to USD, look at that, we rewrite it to USD. And so that way we can just pull in this value on load every single time. So that's very cool. Okay, so that's local storage right there. I mean, that's basically it. It's what's really difficult about it is being clever with how you use it and when you need to use it. But it is very simple to use. Okay, let's continue on to our next concept. So we implement local storage. We got the drop down. We're switching out this preferred currency. Great. So let's talk about async JavaScript through promises. So right here in the title, I have a link to some more docs on promises. But let's give a basic overview right now. So a promise is an object representing the eventual completion or failure of an asynchronous operation. So what asynchronous really means in the context of JavaScript is this means this is code that we might have to wait for. There is an indeterminate amount of time that it might take for something to execute. And when code is running, it's executing from the top down, essentially. That's a good way to think of it, at least for JavaScript. So we're executing from the top down. And so all of a sudden, if something, I say that const currency equals this thing, and then we keep going, and then I try and use currency later, but we haven't yet gotten the currency from, or Bitcoin price would maybe be a better example, right? It takes about a half a second to get the Bitcoin price, but that half a second can make all the difference. If I expect to have gotten the Bitcoin price in a quarter of a second, and then I try and use it a quarter of a second later, my app is going to crash. My program is going to crash. And so this is that very deep. It's a very deep problem in computer science of synchronous versus asynchronous operations. But JavaScript luckily handles it in a very simple way, and promises are one of those simple kind of ways of handling code that runs in an indeterminate amount of time. Okay, so promises have 3 states: pending, fulfilled, or rejected, right? So you just call this whatever it is, like right here we're using fetch. You just call it, and if you get a .then, you know that you successfully got the data. So right here, this is a good example. So this is another example, fetching the Bitcoin price. We're grabbing the currency and the API URL just like before. And we use fetch. Okay, we say fetch API URL. This is a promise. And then we are able to say .then, and .then means that, okay, the promise was successful. So .then, we take a response, we turn it into JSON, and then .then again, we are able to grab the data and we set it to the price element. And then .catch will handle any errors. Anytime that a promise does not become fulfilled, right? Because it can either be pending, it is still executing, it's fulfilled, which gets handled by .then, or it is rejected, which gets handled by .catch, right? So .catch is always our place where we can catch our error and handle it, and then .then is always where we will catch our successful operation from that point. So this is one way to do asynchronous JavaScript right here. Yes, so let's see the other way. So this is async JavaScript with promises. And then the sometimes a little more simple looking way is async JavaScript with async/await. Now, first of all, I just want to say that I wouldn't show you all of this unless I thought that it was necessary, and that you are going to see both promises and async await in a lot of different code. I know when I was first learning, I felt like the tutorials I was taking, they were showing me too many things, explaining too many different ways of doing one thing. I'm not trying to do that. I honestly know that you will run into both promises and async await. So it's at least good to see how they work in a simple way, get some experience down for them, and then yeah, just know what the use case is, the purpose and the meaning behind it. Okay, so we saw promises with .then, .catch. So async await is slightly different, but very similar. So async await is syntactic sugar. This is a fancy thing that programmers like to say sometimes. It basically means it's a way of doing something that looks a little bit cleaner. It's a little bit more readable versus, you know, the kind of wrapping of like .then and .catch and these callbacks that can be a little bit much with promises. So async await is a more readable way built on top of promises, making asynchronous code look and behave more like synchronous code. So the async keyword is used to define an asynchronous function, which will always return a promise. Inside an async function, right, so we see this fetch Bitcoin price now becomes an async function. Inside an async function, you can use the await keyword to pause the execution until a promise is resolved or rejected. Async await makes the code more readable, easier to reason about compared to promise chaining. That's what you might call this .then, .catch. That's kind of chaining a promise. It's chaining all of these scenarios where you're handling the resolution of the promise. Okay, and then you can handle errors in the catch block. So very similar, we have a catch. It just happens to be a block. Right, so here in our new fetch Bitcoin price function, just like before, we're grabbing the currency, API URL, but then we have this try catch block is what we call it. So this is a cool block of code. You'll see this all over as you're doing different development with JavaScript. And so try catch works very similar to .then, .catch. Meaning that with try, we're basically saying, hey, we're gonna try something here. We're gonna try to run a few lines of code, and we're gonna see what happens inside of this try block. And in this scenario where something goes wrong in here, something errors out, that we will fall into the catch block, and that error will be caught in the catch block. Right? So this just happens to be with asynchronous code, this happens to be the way that you always want to handle it. You want to have a scenario where you can grab a success, and you want to have a scenario where you can explicitly handle an error. So here we say response equals await fetch, and then data equals await response.json, right? Do you see the kind of parallels between the promise here? We're at fetch API URL .then response.json .then Bitcoin price equals data.data.amount. Here, response equals await fetch, right? So we're assigning the response of this fetch to this variable, and we're waiting for it. And then we're able to say data, a new variable, is awaiting for the .json of that response. And then we're able to say that Bitcoin price is data.data.amount. We assign it to text content. Okay, so that is async await. So anytime that you see await on any line of code and async in the function, you know that, okay, this is an asynchronous function. It's going to return a promise. It's doing something that it needs to wait on, which is usually talking to an API. It's usually what it is. And if you see this kind of syntax with the .then, .catch, you know that there's a promise that's being handled explicitly, and something successful should be happening inside of the .then, and then a failure, of course, in the .catch. Okay, enough talking about this. Actually, one more thing. What is fetch? Because you haven't been introduced to fetch yet. Fetch is a modern JavaScript API for making HTTP requests from the browser. Provides a more straightforward and flexible way to send requests and handle responses compared to the older XML HTTP request. So this is basically just a cleaner way, because right now we're using this XHR, this XML HTTP request. We have all these weird lines of code, on load, response type. It's really confusing. I don't like looking at it. I'm sure that this was maybe one of your least favorite pieces of code. But with the fetch API, this is going to make it a lot cleaner. Just like our example before, we see a similar one here where we're able to fetch with the first argument being a URL. We can have some options that we pass into there as well for some more advanced use cases, and then just .then and .catch. So it's a great way to use fetch. You can also use fetch like we do here with async and await. Okay, now let's update the fetch Bitcoin price function using async and await. So remember, any function that uses await inside of it needs to be an async function, so that JavaScript knows to basically wait on its execution. So that is the difference here. We see async function fetch Bitcoin price, and then we're gonna have this try catch block here. And this should massively simplify our fetch Bitcoin price function, and I think make it look a lot more readable and a lot more explainable. So this whole big old function right here, fetch Bitcoin price, we're gonna highlight over the whole thing, this whole damn thing, paste, and now it becomes, I mean, how many lines is this? 7 through 19. So a lot shorter, a lot cleaner. Stretch this out. We just grab the currency from local storage or USD, API URL of the currency, and then we try to get the response, get that data as JSON, get the amount from the data, set it into the DOM. Otherwise, we have an error and we console.error that error. Beautifully simple, and we see that our code is still running. Let's run it again just to make sure. Yep, our code is still running. We are successfully fetching the price. That's the euro. That is US dollar. Beautiful. So we have now updated to use this fetch Bitcoin price. So now in our script up here, we have fetch Bitcoin price function. We have update date and time, toggle price visibility. We have a few intervals, and then our body, and then our script down here at the bottom. And you could actually turn this script right here, you could turn this into a function as well. I think that would be a good kind of practice for you to do to refactor this code, because this is just a block of code that's just running, but we could call it explicitly here at the bottom. But yeah, those are, I believe that was my last slide. So we updated fetch Bitcoin price. Yeah, so that's the last slide. So this is basically the state that we're at right now. The web page doesn't look that much different, but we're just adding on these concepts piece by piece. And we're going to be able to combine all of these concepts pretty soon, I think, into kind of a seamless package that'll allow us to build much more expansive and beautiful, featureful apps. But nonetheless, I encourage you, practice your CSS and your JavaScript in the meantime, and maybe style this up, make it look a little bit nicer, maybe add some features, add some currencies down here. And I think that would be good practice for you. And so we'll continue this lesson or continue this series pretty soon. And I think we might actually be getting into React next, or maybe some more advanced styling, something like that. I'll figure it out. But cool, I hope this was helpful. Keep an eye out for more tutorials, and of course, just in general, all of the videos that we're putting out on the Plebdevs YouTube channel. And of course, you can find everything at plebdevs.com right here. So it's been fun. I will see you next time. Bye.